The transport vessel Meridian's edge shuddered
We
as
need
it
to
descended
move
through the
now.
thick atmosphere of Kepler
It's not safe here
442b,
anymore.
its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Inside the cramped passenger compartment, Marcus Chen gripped his seat restraints and tried not to think about the fact that this rickety civilian transport was his only way to reach the frontier colony of New Thessalonica. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd been commanding a state-of-the-art military cruiser through hostile space, and now he was reduced to hitching rides on cargo haulers like some desperate refugee. Which, he supposed, wasn't far from the truth. The descent stabilized as they broke through the cloud cover, revealing the sprawling landscape of humanity's newest colony world. From this height, New Thessalonica looked deceptively peaceful, rolling green hills dotted with prefabricated settlements, mining operations carving geometric scars into distant mountains, and the gleaming spire of the colonial capital rising from the central plains like a beacon of human ambition. It was beautiful, in its way, but Marcus knew better than most that beauty often concealed ugliness beneath. "First time on a frontier world?" asked the passenger sitting across from him, a middle-aged woman with the weathered hands of someone who'd spent her life working with machinery. Her name was Elena Vasquez, according to the manifest, and she'd struck up a conversation during the long journey from Earth. Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The past few months had been a blur of investigations, hearings, and, ultimately, disgrace. The court-martial had been swift and decisive: reduction in rank, dismissal from service, and a permanent black mark on his record that would follow him wherever he went. The official charges were insubordination and failure to follow direct orders. The unofficial reality was that he'd chosen to save lives over following protocol, and, in the rigid hierarchy of the Earth Defense Force, that was an unforgivable sin. "You look like military," Elena observed, her tone neutral but not unkind. "Or ex-military, I should say. We get a lot of your type out here on the frontier. People looking for a fresh start, a chance to prove themselves again." "Something like that," Marcus replied, his voice hoarse from disuse. He'd barely spoken to another human being in weeks, not since the final hearing where Admiral Morrison had stripped him of his rank and his future with ceremonial precision. The transport touched down with a bone-jarring thud that spoke volumes about the pilot's experience, or lack thereof. Marcus gathered his few belongings, a single duffel bag containing everything he owned, a battered tablet with his colonial work assignment, and the service pistol they'd allowed him to keep as a gesture of respect for his previous service. The irony of that particular courtesy wasn't lost on him either. New Thessalonica's spaceport was a study in controlled chaos. Cargo handlers rushed between landing pads, moving containers of raw materials bound for Earth and manufactured goods destined for the colony's growing settlements. The air was thick with the smell of fuel, metal, and something else, something organic and alien that reminded Marcus he was no longer in familiar space. His assigned contact was waiting near the customs checkpoint, a tall, stern-faced woman in colonial administrative uniform who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Her nameplate read Director Sarah Kim, and her expression suggested she'd already decided Marcus was going to be more trouble than he was worth. "Chen," she said without preamble, consulting a tablet. "Former Lieutenant Commander, Earth Defense Force. Stripped of rank following the Proxima incident." She looked up at him with cold, evaluating eyes. "I won't pretend I'm happy about this assignment. We requested experienced colonial administrators, not disgraced military officers." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came with discussions of his fall from grace. "I understand, Director. I'm here to work, nothing more." "Good, because that's exactly what you'll be doing. Your assignment is Survey Station Omega 7, approximately 200 kilometers northeast of here. It's a geological survey operation in the Broken Hills region. We're mapping mineral deposits and assessing the area for potential mining expansion." She paused, studying his face for any sign of disappointment. "It's isolated, understaffed, and generally considered a punishment posting. Most people last about 6 months before requesting a transfer." "How long has the current team been there?" 18 months. "They're unique." Director Kim's expression suggested this uniqueness wasn't necessarily a positive trait. "The team leader is Dr. Alexandra Reeves, xenogeologist and former Alliance Research Corps. She's been out there longer than anyone and seems to prefer it that way." You'll be serving as supply coordinator and general support staff.
Think you can handle that?
Marcus shouldered his duffel bag.
I can handle it. We'll see. Director Kim turned and began walking toward the exit. Transport to Omega-7 leaves in 30 minutes.
I suggest you use the time to grab any personal supplies you'll need. The next scheduled supply run isn't for another month. The ride to Survey Station Omega-7 was Marcus's first real taste of life on the frontier. The transport was a rugged six-wheeled vehicle designed for rough terrain, and the route to the Broken Hills lived up to its name. They bounced and lurched through rocky canyons, across dried riverbeds, and up steep mountain paths that seemed to exist more as suggestions than actual roads. His driver, a laconic colonist named Pete who seemed to view conversation as a waste of energy, pointed out various landmarks as they traveled. "That's Devil's Crown," he said, indicating a jagged mountain peak that rose like a broken tooth against the pale blue sky.
"Local wildlife likes to nest in the caves up there. Big things, with too many teeth and not enough fear of humans. Dangerous?"
"Everything's dangerous out here if you're stupid enough," Pete replied philosophically. "The trick is being smart enough to stay alive long enough to learn better."
As they climbed higher into the hills, the landscape became increasingly alien.
The vegetation was wrong, twisted trees with metallic bark that reflected the sunlight in prismatic patterns, ground cover that seemed to pulse with its own internal rhythm, and flowers that tracked their movement like living eyes. It was beautiful and unsettling in equal measure, a constant reminder that this world had not evolved with humanity in mind. "There she is," Pete said eventually, pointing toward a cluster of prefabricated buildings nestled in a valley between two towering rock formations.
"Survey Station Omega-7. Home sweet home."
The station was larger than Marcus had expected but smaller than he'd hoped. 5 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard, with various pieces of survey equipment and communication arrays scattered throughout the complex. Solar collectors gleamed on every rooftop, and he could see the distinctive bulk of a fusion generator tucked discreetly behind the main laboratory building. It looked functional rather than comfortable, exactly what he'd expected from a remote scientific outpost. Pete pulled up to what appeared to be the main entrance and killed the engine.
"Doc Reeves is probably in the lab. She usually is this time of day."
"Just follow the sound of argument and you'll find her."
"Argument?"
"Doc argues with her equipment, her data, the weather, the local wildlife, and anyone else who happens to be within earshot. Don't take it personal, she argues with everyone except herself, and I suspect that's only because she always wins those conversations." Marcus climbed out of the transport and immediately noticed the difference in air pressure and composition. The atmosphere was breathable but thinner than Earth standard, with a faint metallic taste that would take some getting used to. The gravity was slightly lighter too, making his steps feel oddly bouncy. The main laboratory building was exactly where Pete had predicted, and the sound of raised voices was audible even from outside. Marcus approached the entrance and hesitated, unsure of the protocol for announcing himself. The decision was made for him when the door burst open and a young man in a stained lab coat emerged, looking harried and slightly singed.
"We need
"Dr.
to move
Reeves,
now.
I'm telling you, the calibration
It's not
is
safe
fine.
here anymore."
The spectrometer isn't malfunctioning, it's finding exactly what it's supposed to find, which is apparently impossible according to every geological model we have. Then, either the models are wrong or we're making a fundamental error in our methodology, came a voice from inside the lab, crisp and precise despite the obvious frustration. "Run the analysis again, and this time check your baseline readings.
I want 3 independent confirmations before we even consider submitting this data."
The young man noticed Marcus standing there and seemed to remember his manners.
"Oh, sorry, you must be our new supply coordinator."
"I'm Dr. James Park, assistant researcher and professional bearer of bad news."
"Marcus Chen. And what kind of bad news are we talking about?" Before Park could answer, the voice from inside called out, "James, who are you talking to out there? If it's another wildlife researcher wanting to borrow our equipment, tell them to file a proper requisition like everyone else."
"It's the new guy, Dr. Reeves. The supply coordinator from the Colonial Administration." There was a pause, followed by the sound of equipment being set down with perhaps more force than strictly necessary.
"Well, bring him in then.
I suppose he'll need to know what he's signing up for." Marcus followed Park into the laboratory and immediately understood why the young researcher looked slightly overwhelmed. The space was a maze of sophisticated equipment, sample containers, data displays, and what appeared to be several ongoing experiments in various stages of completion. Charts and graphs covered every available wall surface, and the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of scientific instruments working around the clock. In the center of it all stood Dr. Alexandra Reeves, and Marcus's first impression was of controlled intensity barely contained within a deceptively small frame. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to catalog and analyze everything they encountered. Her lab coat was pristine despite the chaos around her, and she moved with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to working alone in challenging conditions. "So you're Chen," she said without preamble, looking him up and down with the same analytical intensity she might apply to a geological sample. "Former military, according to your file. Court-martialed for insubordination. Either you're someone who can't follow orders, or someone who wouldn't follow bad orders. Which is it?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. Most people tiptoed around his military disgrace, treating it like a contagious disease. "I followed my conscience instead of my orders. In retrospect, that might have been a mistake." Interesting answer. Most people would try to justify themselves or claim they were wronged by the system. Dr. Reeves returned to her workstation, where a complex molecular display rotated slowly on a holographic projector. "I don't particularly care about your past, Mr. Chen. What I care about is whether you can do your job without interfering with mine." "Can you?" "I can." "Good. James, show him to his quarters and bring him up to speed on our supply situation. I want a full inventory by tomorrow morning, and I need to know what our critical needs are for the next supply run." As they left the laboratory, Park shook his head ruefully. "Don't let her intimidate you. She's actually not as difficult as she seems, she's worse. But she's also brilliant, and she's keeping this place running on determination and caffeine." Marcus's quarters were Spartan but functional: a small bedroom, basic hygiene facilities, and a tiny workspace with a communications terminal. His predecessor had left behind a detailed manual covering supply protocols, inventory management, and emergency procedures. It was clear that whoever had been here before took their job seriously. "What happened to the last guy?" Marcus asked as Park showed him the supply storage areas. "Rodriguez? He requested a transfer after about 4 months. Said the isolation was getting to him." Park paused, considering his words carefully. "Look, I should probably warn you, Dr. Reeves isn't exactly what you'd call social. She's been out here longer than anyone, and she tends to treat human interaction as a necessary evil at best. Don't take it personally. How long have you been here?" 8 months. I was supposed to rotate out 3 months ago, but..." Park gestured vaguely at the laboratory building. "We're on the verge of something big here. Something that could change everything we know about planetary formation and mineral deposition. I can't leave now, not when we're this close to a breakthrough." That evening, Marcus found himself alone in his quarters, reviewing the supply manifests and trying to understand the rhythm of life at Survey Station Omega-7. The facility operated on a skeleton crew, Dr. Reeves as team leader and primary researcher, Park as her assistant, 2 additional researchers who were currently on leave, and now Marcus as support staff. It was a small, isolated community at the edge of human civilization, and he was the outsider trying to find his place. Through his window, he could see lights still burning in the laboratory building. Dr. Reeves was working late again, according to Park's casual mention that she rarely left the lab before midnight. There was something almost obsessive about her dedication, as if she were driven by forces he couldn't understand. His communications terminal chimed with an incoming message from the Colonial Administration, routine supply reports and administrative updates that required his attention. As he worked through the paperwork, Marcus found his gaze drifting back to the laboratory lights and wondered what kind of person chose to spend 18 months in voluntary isolation at the edge of known space. The first few days at Survey Station Omega-7 fell into a predictable routine. Marcus threw himself into his work with the same focus that had once made him an exceptional military officer. He reorganized the supply storage areas, updated the inventory management system, and established more efficient protocols for tracking equipment and materials. It was mundane work, but he found a certain satisfaction in bringing order to chaos.
Dr. Reeves remained an enigma.
She appeared at meals occasionally, engaged in brief, professional conversations about supply needs and logistics, and otherwise remained sequestered in her laboratory. Marcus began to understand what Park meant about her treating human interaction as a necessary evil. She was polite but distant, efficient but cold, and seemed to view personal conversation as a waste of valuable time. It was during his second week at the station that Marcus first glimpsed the passion that drove her relentless work schedule. He was delivering some requested equipment to the laboratory when he overheard her on a communications link with someone at the Colonial Research Division. "You're not listening to me," she was saying, her voice tight with frustrated urgency.
"The mineral composition we're finding here doesn't match any known geological models.
We're talking about crystalline structures that shouldn't exist in nature, rare earth concentrations that violate basic principles of planetary formation.
This isn't just an anomaly, it's a fundamental challenge to everything we think we know about how worlds like this develop."
The voice on the other end was too distorted for Marcus to make out individual words, but the dismissive tone was unmistakable. "I don't care if it seems impossible," Dr. Reeves continued.
"Science isn't about what seems possible, it's about what is.
And what is, according to every instrument we have, is that we're sitting on top of the most significant geological discovery in recent history. I need more funding, more equipment, and more time to properly investigate this." More indistinct responses, clearly negative in nature. "Then, you're making a mistake that you'll regret for the rest of your career," Dr. Reeves said finally, and terminated the connection. Marcus pretended to be busy with his equipment delivery, but he could see the frustration radiating from her rigid posture. This was someone who had discovered something extraordinary and couldn't get anyone to take her seriously. "Problems with the administration?" he asked carefully. Dr. Reeves looked up at him with those analytical eyes, and for a moment he saw something vulnerable beneath the professional facade.
"They think I'm chasing impossible theories.
18 months of data, and they dismiss it as equipment malfunction or procedural error."
Are they right? No. The answer was immediate and certain.
Every instrument tells the same story, every sample confirms the same impossible reality.
We're not just looking at unusual mineral deposits here, Mr. Chen.
We're looking at evidence that this world's formation was fundamentally different from anything in our experience.
Marcus set down the equipment he'd been carrying and studied the data displays surrounding them. Different how?
For the first time since he'd arrived, Dr. Reeves seemed to see him as something more than a supply coordinator who happened to be occupying space in her laboratory. "Come here," she said, moving to a large holographic display. "Look at this." The display showed a three-dimensional map of the local geological structure, with different colors representing various mineral compositions and density readings. To Marcus's untrained eye, it looked like abstract art, but he could see patterns that suggested order within apparent chaos. "This is what we should be finding," Dr. Reeves said, manipulating the controls to show a different display. "Standard sedimentary layers, predictable mineral distributions, everything following the normal rules of planetary geology." She switched back to the first display.
"And this is what we're actually finding."
The difference was stark. Where the theoretical model showed gradual transitions and logical progressions, the actual data revealed sharp boundaries, impossible concentrations, and structures that seemed to defy natural formation processes.
"It's like something interfered with the normal geological development of this region," Dr. Reeves explained. "Something that created conditions we've never encountered before." "What kind of something?"
"That's the question, isn't it?" She turned off the display and returned to her workstation.
"And it's a question that no one seems interested in helping me answer."
That night, Marcus found himself unable to sleep. He'd spent years following orders without question, accepting what he was told and doing what he was trained to do. It had been a comfortable existence in many ways, clear hierarchy, defined objectives, and the assumption that someone else was making the important decisions. Only when he'd been forced to choose between following orders and saving lives had he discovered that blind obedience had its limits. Now he was watching Dr. Reeves struggle with a different kind of institutional blindness. She had evidence of something extraordinary, something that challenged established scientific understanding, and she was being dismissed because her discoveries didn't fit within accepted parameters. It was a familiar pattern, and one that Marcus found increasingly difficult to ignore. Part 2, the discovery. 3 weeks into his assignment at Survey Station Omega-7, Marcus had settled into the routine of frontier life more easily than he'd expected. The work was straightforward, the isolation was actually a relief after months of legal proceedings and public disgrace, and the small team dynamic reminded him of the close-knit units he'd commanded during his military service. Even Dr. Reeves had begun to thaw slightly, acknowledging his presence with something approaching professional courtesy. The change in their relationship began with a supply emergency. Marcus was conducting his weekly equipment inventory when he discovered that their primary geological scanner had developed a critical malfunction. The device was essential to their ongoing survey work, and, according to the maintenance manual, it required specialized replacement parts that weren't scheduled to arrive for another 6 weeks. Dr. Reeves, he announced, entering the laboratory with the scanner's diagnostic report in hand, "We have a problem." She looked up from a sample analysis that had clearly been consuming her attention. "Define problem, Mr. Chen." "The primary scanner is down. Power coupling failure in the resonance chamber. We can jury-rig something for basic operations, but detailed subsurface mapping is off the table until we get replacement parts." Dr. Reeves went very still, the kind of stillness that Marcus recognized from his military experience as the moment when someone was calculating the cost of disaster. "How long?" 6 weeks minimum for parts delivery. Maybe longer if we have to special order from Earth." "Unacceptable." Dr. Reeves stood up abruptly, her chair rolling back to crash into an equipment cabinet. "We're in the middle of mapping the primary anomaly zone. 6 weeks means losing an entire seasonal window, and, by the time we restart, the geological conditions will have changed." Marcus studied her face, seeing the same desperate frustration he'd witnessed during her communication with the Colonial Research Division. "What if I could fix it?" "You're a supply coordinator, not an engineer. I'm also a former military officer who spent 10 years keeping complex systems operational in hostile environments. I've jury-rigged everything from navigation computers to life support systems." Marcus gestured toward the disabled scanner. "May I take a look?" Dr. Reeves hesitated, clearly torn between professional skepticism and desperate necessity. "If you damage it further, we're completely dead in the water." "Understood." The scanner was a sophisticated piece of equipment, but the basic principles were familiar to Marcus from his military engineering training. The power coupling failure had caused a cascade effect through the resonance chamber, but the core components appeared to be intact. It would require some creative rewiring and a few improvised parts, but he thought he could restore basic functionality. "I'll need some components from the communications array," he said after studying the problem. "Non-essential redundancy circuits that I can cannibalize for parts. It won't be pretty, but it should work." "Do it." Marcus spent the next 12 hours elbow-deep in the scanner's internal mechanisms, tracing circuits, testing connections, and gradually coaxing the machine back to life. Dr. Reeves remained in the laboratory throughout the process, ostensibly working on other projects but clearly monitoring his progress. Park brought them both meals that went largely untouched and coffee that disappeared as quickly as it arrived. "Try it now," Marcus said finally, stepping back from the reassembled device. Dr. Reeves activated the scanner's startup sequence, and the familiar hum of operational equipment filled the laboratory. The displays came online one by one, showing system diagnostics that gradually shifted from red to amber to green. 93% operational efficiency, Dr. Reeves announced, relief evident in her voice. "Mr. Chen, this is excellent work." "Marcus," he corrected automatically. "And it was just basic engineering." "Marcus." She turned to face him, and, for the first time since his arrival, her expression was genuinely warm.
Thank you. This means more to me than you know. The successful repair marked a turning point in their professional relationship.
Dr. Reeves began including Marcus in technical discussions, explaining the significance of their findings and the theoretical implications of their discoveries. She showed him how to interpret geological survey data, walked him through the process of sample analysis, and gradually revealed the scope of the mystery that had consumed 18 months of her life.
The anomaly isn't just localized to this region, she explained one evening as they worked late in the laboratory.
We're seeing similar readings from survey stations across the continent, but no one wants to acknowledge the pattern. Marcus studied the continental geological map she'd assembled, noting the scattered points of unusual mineral concentrations and impossible formations.
It does look systematic. More than systematic, it looks designed.
Dr. Reeves highlighted specific locations on the map, revealing a pattern that was clearly not random.
Look at the spacing, the geometric relationships between anomaly sites. This isn't natural geological variation. You're suggesting artificial intervention?
I'm suggesting we follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how uncomfortable the implications might be.
Dr. Reeves saved the map and turned to face him. The question is, are you prepared to help me prove it?
Marcus considered the question carefully. He'd already destroyed one career by following his conscience instead of institutional expectations.
Was he prepared to risk what little future he had left on another impossible crusade? What would you need me to do? Help me plan an expedition to the primary anomaly site.
It's about 50 kilometers northeast of here, in terrain that's never been properly surveyed. We'll need supplies, equipment, and someone with enough technical knowledge to keep our instruments functioning in hostile conditions.
The colonial administration approved this?
The colonial administration doesn't need to approve every aspect of our survey work, as long as we stay within our assigned operational area. Dr. Reeves's expression was carefully neutral.
And, technically, the anomaly site falls within our jurisdiction. Technically.
Sometimes, Marcus, you have to decide what's more important, following the rules or discovering the truth. It was a choice Marcus recognized all too well. He'd faced it before, and his decision had cost him everything he'd thought he valued. But, looking at Dr. Reeves, seeing the passionate dedication in her eyes, he realized that some things were worth the risk.
When do we leave?
They spent the next week planning the expedition with the meticulous care of a military operation. Marcus drew on his strategic training to plot routes, identify potential hazards, and plan contingencies for equipment failure or environmental emergencies.
Dr.
Reeves assembled a comprehensive instrument package designed to conduct the most thorough geological analysis possible within their limited time frame. Park would remain at the station to maintain communications and provide emergency support if needed. He wasn't entirely comfortable with the arrangement, but he understood the necessity of the mission and the importance of maintaining operational continuity at the base. The terrain becomes increasingly difficult after the first 20 kilometers, Marcus explained as they reviewed their planned route.
We'll be traveling through areas that haven't seen human presence since the initial planetary survey.
Local wildlife, unstable geology, and limited communications range.
How long for a round trip? 4 days minimum, assuming everything goes according to plan.
6 days if we encounter significant obstacles.
Marcus paused, studying the topographical maps. Are you certain this is worth the risk?
Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, staring at the data displays that had consumed so much of her life. 18 months ago, I came here expecting to conduct routine geological surveys and contribute to humanity's expansion into this sector. Instead, I found evidence that challenges everything we think we know about planetary formation and, possibly, the history of this region of space. She turned to face him directly, and Marcus saw the weight of discovery and frustration that had driven her to this point. If I'm right, we're looking at evidence of ancient artificial intervention in geological processes. If I'm wrong, we're looking at natural phenomena that will revolutionize our understanding of planetary science. Either way, it's worth the risk. The morning of their departure dawned clear and cold, with the kind of crystalline air clarity that made distant mountains seem close enough to touch. Marcus loaded their equipment into the station's all-terrain vehicle, a rugged six-wheeled transport designed for extended operations in hostile environments.
Dr. Reeves conducted final equipment checks with the methodical precision of someone whose life might depend on instrumental accuracy. Communications check every 4 hours, Park reminded them as they prepared to leave. If I don't hear from you by the scheduled contact time, I'm notifying Colonial Search and Rescue.
Understood, Marcus replied, performing his own final vehicle inspection. Keep the station operational and don't take any unnecessary risks while we're gone. The journey to the anomaly site took them through terrain that gradually became more alien and hostile. The familiar vegetation of the station's vicinity gave way to twisted geological formations that seemed to defy natural erosion patterns. Metallic outcroppings reflected the sunlight in prismatic displays that were beautiful and unsettling in equal measure. The mineral concentrations are increasing, Dr. Reeves observed, monitoring her portable scanners as they traveled.
We're definitely heading in the right direction. After 6 hours of challenging travel, they reached the edge of the anomaly zone proper.
The landscape ahead was unlike anything Marcus had seen before: geometric rock formations that looked almost crystalline in structure, ground that seemed to pulse with internal luminescence, and an atmosphere that made their instruments register readings that bordered on the impossible. Welcome to the frontier of human understanding, Dr. Reeves said quietly as they established their temporary camp at the anomaly's edge. That first night in the anomaly zone, Marcus experienced something that would fundamentally alter his perception of reality. They had set up their camp according to standard protocols: shelter, communications equipment, scientific instruments arranged for optimal data collection. Dr. Reeves was absorbed in analyzing the initial readings from their arrival, while Marcus performed routine security checks and equipment maintenance. It was during his final perimeter check that he first noticed the lights. At first, he assumed they were some form of natural phosphorescence or perhaps reflected starlight from the unusual mineral deposits. But, as he watched, the lights began to move in patterns that were clearly not random. They pulsed in sequences that seemed almost like communication, shifting from one geometric formation to another in ways that suggested intentional design. Dr. Reeves, he called softly, not wanting to startle her but knowing she needed to see this. You should take a look at this. She joined him at the edge of their camp, and, together they watched the light display that was unfolding around them. The patterns were becoming more complex, more obviously structured, and the luminescence seemed to be responding to their presence. My God, Dr. Reeves whispered, her voice filled with wonder and scientific excitement.
This is active. Whatever's causing these formations, it's not dormant, it's responding to external stimuli.
Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air.
Are we safe here? I don't know.
But we're witnessing something extraordinary, something that's going to change our understanding of this world and possibly others like it. Dr. Reeves was already moving back toward their equipment, hands flying over instrument controls.
I need to record everything, document every pattern, every variation in luminescence.
They spent the night documenting phenomena that challenged their understanding of natural processes. The lights weren't just random displays, they were part of a complex system that seemed to be analyzing and cataloging their presence. Whatever intelligence lay behind the patterns, it was clearly aware of them and possibly trying to communicate. By morning, the light displays had faded with the dawn, leaving behind only the strange geological formations and the growing certainty that they had discovered something far more significant than unusual mineral deposits. As they prepared to venture deeper into the anomaly zone, Marcus realized that his life had once again reached a pivotal moment, a choice between the safe path of ignorance and the dangerous path of discovery. Looking at Dr. Reeves, seeing the passionate determination in her eyes as she prepared for another day of investigation, Marcus understood that his choice had already been made. Whatever lay ahead in the deeper regions of the anomaly zone, whatever truths they might uncover about this world and its impossible geology, he would see it through to the end. The weak man who had blindly followed orders without question was gone, replaced by someone willing to face the unknown in pursuit of truth. And, as they ventured deeper into the anomaly zone, Marcus began to understand that some discoveries were worth any risk, any sacrifice, any personal cost. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others, and, in the strange, luminescent landscape of an alien world, Marcus Chen finally understood what that truly meant. Part 3, the transformation. The deeper they penetrated into the anomaly zone, the more obvious it became that they were exploring something far beyond conventional geological phenomena. The landscape around them had taken on an almost organic quality, with rock formations that curved and twisted in patterns that seemed to follow some internal logic rather than natural erosion processes. Dr. Reeves's instruments were registering readings that challenged the basic assumptions of planetary science. "Look at this," she said on their second morning in the zone, showing Marcus the overnight data recordings. "The mineral composition is shifting in real time. Not over geological timescales, over hours. The molecular structures are actually reorganizing themselves." Marcus studied the data displays, trying to understand the implications of what she was showing him. "That's impossible. Impossible according to everything we thought we knew about chemistry and physics. But it's happening nonetheless." Dr. Reeves gestured toward the surrounding landscape, where the morning light was creating new prismatic effects as it interacted with the ever-changing mineral surfaces. "We're not just looking at unusual geological formations, we're looking at active technology. Technology implies intelligence. Are you suggesting this was created by some form of alien civilization?" "I'm suggesting we follow the evidence and see where it leads us." Dr. Reeves packed her instruments and prepared for another day of exploration. "But, Marcus, if I'm right about this, we're looking at the discovery of the millennium. Proof that intelligence has been active in this region of space, possibly for millions of years." As they continued deeper into the anomaly zone, the evidence for artificial intervention became increasingly undeniable. They discovered geometric patterns carved into rock faces with precision that exceeded human engineering capabilities. They found crystalline structures that seemed to store and transmit energy in ways that violated known physical principles. Most significantly, they began to detect what could only be described as data streams, information flows that suggested a vast network of interconnected systems. "It's like we're walking through the remnants of some kind of planetary-scale computer system," Dr. Reeves explained as they analyzed the latest readings. "Whatever civilization created this, they didn't just build structures, they integrated their technology into the geological foundation of the world itself." Marcus felt the weight of discovery settling over him like a physical presence. "If this is true, if we can prove it, it changes everything." "Everything," Dr. Reeves agreed. "Our understanding of the galaxy, our assumptions about intelligence and technology, our place in the cosmic order. But, Marcus, proving it means challenging institutional assumptions that go back centuries. Are you prepared for that kind of fight?" It was a question that struck at the heart of Marcus's transformation over the past weeks. The man who had arrived at Survey Station Omega-7 was broken, defeated, seeking only to fade into obscurity and avoid further conflict. That man would have counseled caution, suggested they gather more data, recommended working through proper channels and institutional procedures. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who had rediscovered the courage to pursue truth regardless of personal cost. The process hadn't been sudden or dramatic, it had been gradual, built through small acts of competence and growing confidence, through working alongside someone who embodied the intellectual courage he'd lost. "I'm prepared," Marcus said finally. "But what about you? You've been fighting this battle alone for 18 months. Are you prepared to see it through to the end, no matter what the cost?" Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, staring at the alien landscape that had consumed so much of her life. "I've already sacrificed my career, my relationships, my future prospects in mainstream science. I've been called delusional, incompetent, and worse. But I've also been right, and sometimes being right is the only thing that matters." That evening, they made camp at the edge of what appeared to be the anomaly zone's central formation, a vast crystalline structure that rose from the ground like a geometric mountain, its faceted surfaces reflecting and refracting light in patterns that seemed almost alive. Their instruments were registering energy outputs that defied explanation, and the data streams they'd been detecting throughout the zone seemed to converge on this location. "This is it," Dr. Reeves said with quiet certainty. "Whatever created all of this, whatever intelligence shaped the geology of this entire region, this is where we're going to find our answers." As darkness fell, the central formation began to exhibit the same luminescent displays they'd observed throughout their journey, but magnified to an extraordinary degree. The entire structure became a symphony of light and pattern, pulsing with complex rhythms that suggested vast computational processes taking place within its crystalline matrix. Marcus found himself mesmerized by the display, seeing patterns within patterns, geometric relationships that seemed to hint at mathematical principles beyond human comprehension.
It's trying to communicate with us.
Or analyze us, Dr. Reeves replied, her instruments recording every fluctuation in the light patterns.
Either way, we're witnessing active intelligence in operation. This isn't a relic or a ruin, it's a functioning system.
As they watched, the light patterns began to focus on their location, concentrating around their camp with an intensity that made their equipment register dangerous energy levels. Marcus felt a moment of panic, the old military training that screamed about unknown threats and tactical withdrawal. But Dr. Reeves remained calm, continuing to record data even as the alien intelligence examined them with increasing attention.
Dr. Reeves, Alexandra, we should consider pulling back.
No. Her voice was steady, certain.
This is what we came for, Marcus. Contact. Communication. The chance to prove that we're not alone in the universe. The light patterns suddenly shifted, coalescing into forms that were clearly meant to convey information.
Mathematical sequences, geometric progressions, basic principles of physics and chemistry displayed in luminescent symbols that transcended language barriers. The intelligence behind the system was attempting to establish common ground, to find a basis for communication. Dr. Reeves responded by using their equipment to generate light patterns of their own, simple mathematical relationships, basic scientific principles, an attempt to demonstrate their own intelligence and peaceful intentions. The response was immediate and overwhelming, a flood of information that temporarily overloaded their instruments and filled the night air with patterns of impossible beauty and complexity. "It's working," Dr. Reeves whispered, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to process what they were witnessing.
"We're actually communicating with an alien intelligence."
The communication continued throughout the night, a gradual exchange of increasingly complex information that revealed the scope and purpose of the system they discovered. The intelligence was ancient, millions of years old, and had been dormant for most of human history. But humanity's expansion into this region of space had triggered automated protocols, awakening systems that had been waiting patiently for the arrival of other intelligences. The geological anomalies were just the surface manifestation of a vast network that spanned multiple star systems, an infrastructure of knowledge and technology left behind by a civilization that had transcended physical existence eons ago. They had built their legacy into the fabric of worlds themselves, ensuring that younger civilizations would eventually discover the truth about intelligence and consciousness in the galaxy. As dawn approached, the communication gradually faded, leaving Marcus and Dr. Reeves alone with the overwhelming realization of what they had experienced. They possessed documentation of first contact with an alien intelligence, proof that humanity was part of a larger cosmic community, evidence that would revolutionize human understanding of their place in the universe.
"What happens now?" Marcus asked as they packed their equipment for the return journey.
"Now we face the hardest part," Dr. Reeves replied. "We have to convince a skeptical scientific establishment and a risk-averse colonial administration that what we experienced was real. We have to fight for recognition, funding, and the right to continue this research. And we have to do it knowing that institutional forces will try to suppress, discredit, or co-opt our discoveries." Marcus nodded, understanding the magnitude of the challenge they faced.
"It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is."
Dr. Reeves looked back at the central formation one final time, its crystalline surfaces now quiescent in the morning light. "But, Marcus, we've changed. Both of us.
We're not the same people who came out here 3 days ago."
She was right. Marcus could feel the transformation that had taken place within him over the course of their expedition, not just the discovery of alien intelligence, but the rediscovery of his own capacity for courage and purpose. The broken ex-officer who had arrived at Survey Station Omega-7 was gone, replaced by someone who had proven himself capable of facing the impossible and emerging stronger. The journey back to the station passed in contemplative silence as they both processed the implications of their experience. They had documented first contact with an alien intelligence, discovered evidence of a galactic civilization that spanned millions of years, and proven that humanity was part of a larger cosmic community. But they had also positioned themselves as challengers to institutional orthodoxy, defenders of truths that powerful people would find inconvenient. When they finally reached Survey Station Omega 7, Park was waiting with news that would test their resolve immediately. Colonial administration had been trying to reach them for the past day, demanding an explanation for their unauthorized expedition and threatening disciplinary action for exceeding their operational parameters.
Director Kim wants a full report within 24 hours, Park explained as they unloaded their equipment. And she specifically mentioned that any claims of extraordinary discoveries would require extraordinary evidence.
Marcus and Dr. Reeves exchanged glances, both understanding the subtext. The administration had already decided to discount their findings, regardless of the evidence they'd gathered. It was a familiar pattern: institutional resistance to discoveries that challenged established understanding.
Then, we'll give them extraordinary evidence, Dr. Reeves said quietly.
Marcus, are you prepared for what comes next? Marcus considered the question carefully. He'd spent months recovering from the destruction of his military career, learning to live with disgrace and diminished expectations. Now he was being offered the chance to stand beside someone who embodied everything he'd once believed about duty, honor, and service, not to institutions, but to truth itself. The weak self that had defined him for so long, the part of him that had accepted defeat, embraced mediocrity, and chosen safe compromises over difficult principles, was finally, truly dead. In its place stood someone who had rediscovered the courage to face impossible odds in service of something greater than personal comfort. "I'm prepared," Marcus said, and meant it completely. Over the following weeks, they compiled their evidence into the most comprehensive scientific report either of them had ever produced. Video documentation of the light displays, spectral analysis of the energy emissions, mathematical modeling of the communication patterns, and theoretical frameworks that attempted to explain the implications of their discoveries. It was meticulous, thorough, and undeniably compelling.
The response from the colonial administration was swift and predictable.
Director Kim arrived at Survey Station Omega 7 with a team of investigators, determined to find fault with their methodology, their evidence, and their conclusions. The investigation was a masterpiece of bureaucratic skepticism, designed to discredit their findings through procedural challenges rather than scientific evaluation. "Dr. Reeves," Director Kim said during the formal hearing, "your claims are extraordinary, but your evidence is circumstantial at best. Light displays could be natural phosphorescence. Energy readings could be equipment malfunction.
Mathematical patterns could be observer bias. Where is the definitive proof of alien intelligence?" "The proof is in the totality of the evidence," Dr. Reeves replied calmly. "No single data point proves intelligence, but the pattern as a whole admits no other reasonable explanation." "Reasonable according to whom?"
"Dr. Reeves, you've been isolated in this facility for 18 months.
Is it possible that you've developed what we might call confirmation bias? A tendency to see patterns that support your desired conclusions?"
Marcus watched the hearing with growing anger, recognizing the tactics being used to discredit Dr. Reeves's work. It wasn't about the evidence, it was about institutional control, about preventing discoveries that might disrupt established hierarchies and comfortable assumptions. When his turn came to testify, Marcus made a choice that would define the rest of his life. "Director Kim," he said, standing to address the hearing panel, "I've listened to your questions and your implications, and I understand what's happening here. You've decided that Dr. Reeves's discoveries are too inconvenient to accept, too disruptive to acknowledge, too challenging to your institutional authority to permit. So you're attempting to destroy the messenger rather than address the message."
"Mr. Chen, you're out of order. Your role here is to provide testimony about supply and logistics, not to offer opinions about administrative procedures."
"My role here is to tell the truth," Marcus replied firmly. "And the truth is that Dr. Alexandra Reeves is the most dedicated, competent, and courageous scientist I've ever had the privilege to work with. She has discovered evidence of intelligence beyond Earth, documented first contact with an alien civilization, and provided humanity with proof that we are not alone in the universe. Your response has been to question her sanity, doubt her competence, and attempt to suppress her findings. Marcus paused, looking directly at each member of the hearing panel. I know something about institutional betrayal, Director Kim. I know what it's like to be sacrificed for the convenience of bureaucratic authority. But I also know what it's like to find the courage to stand up for what's right, regardless of personal cost. Dr. Reeves's work represents the most significant scientific discovery in human history, and if you suppress it, you'll be remembered as the people who chose ignorance over enlightenment. The hearing concluded with the predictable decision: Dr. Reeves would be transferred to administrative duties pending further review, the anomaly site would be declared off-limits pending additional study, and all research materials would be confiscated for independent verification. It was a complete victory for institutional control and a devastating defeat for scientific discovery. But, as Marcus and Dr. Reeves prepared for their inevitable separation, they both understood that something more important had been achieved. You didn't have to do that, Dr. Reeves said as they packed her research materials. Standing up for me, challenging the administration, you could have stayed quiet and kept your position. Yes, I could have, Marcus agreed. But I would have hated myself for it. Alexandra, working with you these past months has reminded me who I used to be, who I could be again. You've helped me rediscover the courage to be the person I want to be rather than the person circumstances tried to make me. Dr. Reeves smiled, and, for the first time since he'd known her, the expression was completely without reservation. Marcus, we may have lost this battle, but the war is far from over. There are other institutions, other organizations that will listen to evidence rather than suppress it. Are you prepared to continue this fight? Marcus considered the question, understanding its implications. Continuing meant abandoning any hope of rehabilitation within the colonial administration, accepting permanent exile from mainstream institutions, and embracing a life dedicated to defending truths that powerful people would prefer to remain hidden. It also meant working alongside someone who had shown him what genuine courage looked like, pursuing discoveries that could transform human understanding of their place in the universe, and living according to principles that transcended personal comfort or institutional approval. I'm prepared, Marcus said, and knew with absolute certainty that he meant it. 6 months later, they were working together at an independent research facility on the frontier world of New Avalon, funded by private organizations that valued discovery over bureaucratic control. Their continued research had produced additional evidence of the Galactic Intelligence Network, documentation of similar anomalies on other worlds, and growing support from scientists who were willing to challenge institutional orthodoxy. The work was difficult, often thankless, and frequently dangerous. But Marcus had never been happier or more fulfilled than he was pursuing truth alongside someone who embodied everything he'd once believed about honor, duty, and service. Late one evening, as they worked in their new laboratory beneath the alien stars of New Avalon, Dr. Reeves looked up from her data analysis and asked the question that had become their shared philosophy: Do you ever regret the choice we made? Leaving the safe path for the unknown one? Marcus considered the question seriously, thinking about everything they'd sacrificed and everything they'd gained. The weak man who had arrived at Survey Station Omega-7 would have chosen safety, compromise, and institutional approval over principle. That man was gone, destroyed by his own choice to become something better. In his place stood someone who had learned that the most important battles are fought not against external enemies but against internal limitations, that true strength comes not from avoiding challenges but from facing them with integrity, and that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. Never, Marcus replied, returning to their work with renewed determination. Not for a single moment. Outside their laboratory, the alien stars wheeled in their courses, carrying messages between civilizations that spanned the galaxy, connecting intelligences that had chosen courage over comfort and truth over convenience. And, in that small laboratory on the edge of human space, two people who had destroyed their weaker selves continued the work of expanding human understanding, one discovery at a time. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. In the end, Marcus Chen had learned that this was not just a philosophical principle but a practical truth, a pathway to transformation that began with a single choice: to become worthy of the life you want to live, regardless of what that choice might cost. And, in the warm glow of scientific instruments working to unlock the secrets of the universe, surrounded by the evidence of intelligences that had made similar choices across the vast expanse of time and space, Marcus finally understood that some transformations are worth any price.